And welcome back. We thought we'd be done in 2 parts, but it looks like I just need a little bit more time to complete. This is part 3 of a pragmatic approach for city managers to increase sustainable redevelopment within older commercial districts. Part 1, we laid out the structural framework as well as interpreting that framework. How will we go about researching this question? What's the best plan of attack? Also, why it matters to me. Part 2 dealt with the previous topics, you might say sustainability, urban studies, the tension between technology and tradition, as well as political philosophy, pragmatism, ethics, how they all come together. This final part has a few different subsections to it, but ultimately it's about business administration, and that also includes public administration. You know, ultimately these programs aren't so far apart. About 50 to 60 years ago, business was getting a bad name, so they started to separate out public activities from business activities. But really, they tend to use many of the same skills, except frankly, go ahead. They move on to some of these other conversations, which is a little bit more of an argument. You know, public good versus private good. You know, we could be talking Galbraith or Milton Friedman. You know, what is the role of a corporation? And then also, what use are we going to have for the business districts? I already talked a little bit about urban studies and the planning and the growth use of buildings. New versus olds. Corporate versus the relationship of small businesses. I'd like to think we're not all going to become corporations. In fact, they were banned from England for 100 years for dodgy activities, practically all of the 18th century. They only came back essentially for larger projects like highways, but now they've really become overwhelmed, you might say, the public-private partnership. And then gentlemen like Karl Marx have talked about the expectation of workers versus owners. I also thought Kurt Vonnegut did a nice job with player piano, but I didn't see that as kind of being too close. These are some of the folks who I think are more important. And then, frankly, go ahead. We have Peter Drucker's work, who I've reiterated in the past, Frederick Taylor's important studies of scientific management, which is really just the penultimate of efficiency. But even Taylor wrote about the fact that he didn't think it was good for humans. He just thought it was good to improve for machines and for profitability, but not ultimately for the happiness of people. Abraham Maslow's work on management really is somewhat based on hierarchy of needs, but he really did a great deal of work through Harvard Business Review, who's published. Then closer to the public administration, Woodrow Wilson's opening comments in 1887 about the study of administration, Max Weber's bureaucracy, really how organizations socially come together. And then Emmett Redford, I chose to bring him in because he put out ideal and practice in public administration. And once again, I don't want to just talk about why things are important, but how they can be put to use. And then Jay Shaffert has a number of different articles and essays that are in there. The next section is really about 2 areas I consider together: leadership and entrepreneurship. They come together pretty closely. Peter Drucker, again, his work in Effective Executive, Sun Tzu and the Art of War, Niccolo Machiavelli with The Prince, and Trusted Advisor, which is a little bit lighter reading, but I found one point there that's just absolutely been essential to my work as a consultant and how you work with the client. And if this is going to help city managers, I think that work is also important. Innovation entrepreneurship is the name of Peter Drucker's other work, as well as Lewis's work on public entrepreneurship. Most people think those are paradoxical, but I'd like to think that they have some use together. Then finally, this conversation about corporations. I've mostly read the gloom and doom stuff so far, but it does start off again with Peter Drucker's work and his concept of the corporation, as well as some of his ideas, how that he was laying out what Schumpeter was talking about as well, about the structure, the methods. How do we get these things going? It's not just about making widgets. Joel Bacon brings it a little bit more doom and gloom with his pathological pursuit of power, profit and power for the corporation. I brought in Foucault's Discipline and Punish because when I gave a lot of thought of where this book might fall into the categories, and obviously we read it in a different setting, but ultimately things like panopticism is about how workers also might keep themselves down, how the panopticon under Jeremy Bentham was discussing really that, a prison is more or less could be used as a school, could be an education system, an industry. They can all be used the same way. And ultimately, when we are governing ourselves, then we have issues. Okay? When we're broken down as opposed to thinking about competition. And finally, the post-corporate world. what will life look like after this? Now, almost all of my previous work, in fact, I've never worked for a company with more than 20 people, so I am much more prone to thinking about how the worker sees the world and small business. And William Hollywhite's work, The Organization Man, really, it's almost back again with shows like the Mad Men. But really, what can we do as individuals within our relationship with the organization? Another one I thought was pretty interesting, Merchant of Venice. Folks might question what's the lesson there, but to tell you the truth, after running 3 businesses, if you know the story, strong anti-Semitism, it's about what you want as a business. It's personal and it's business. But just as important, Shylock's role, sometimes it's just not fair. They had a deal, it was broken, there was very little he could do about it. And I think the lesson there is somewhat there for a long time. Shop Class as Soulcraft is really about a gentleman who used to work for a think tank, was quite intelligent, but he preferred to go back to putting together motorcycles. He felt his intelligence would be better used and of more value there. And so I'm usually partial to implementation-related stories. And then finally, Ripken, who can be a bit of a tough character, who wrote The End of Work. What he was trying to get at with this, really, if we're not going to need all these jobs, and the country going through right now with this kind of what they think is a job shift, we're a jobless recovery, well then, what are we all going to do? And going back to Vonnegut's discussion in Player Piano as well, we can't just put everybody into the reeks and wrecks. They can't just either join the army or become redundant. So we're going to have to think about what we're going to do and how sustainability might help us with that. So, feedback I've already received from Dr. Toms and Dr. Leota, evident here. Again, I'm trying to really build a model that removes some flaws. Think about a few cities where things are working. It doesn't have to be a cultural statement as much as the operational help. And then really, what can I do so that city managers do the right things and do things right? And then I think Dr. Leota as well suggested there are really examples from everywhere that we could draw upon. So don't just think about the East Coast for its examples, but everywhere. So with that, if there are questions, please, we do intend to schedule this, and I appreciate your time, patience. It ended up running more than a half hour between the 3 parts. But I look forward to your comments, and I'm available at your convenience. Thank you again.